Hey, SEGways!
I'd imagine most of you who clicked on this video have some impression or knowledge of the Conjuring House. Whether it be the movies, Cody as a Tory, or maybe you've watched some of the many YouTube ghost hunting channels who have been scared half to death while inside the infamous Conjuring House. This video here today isn't about our investigation at the Conjuring House. Those videos will be found on Entity 7 Paranormal and Weeping Willow's channels. But unfortunately, our investigation will not be on my channel, and I will explain why this is a little later in the video. But if you want to watch our investigations of our night at the Conjuring House in full, please go watch these videos here. The link will be in the description. In this video you're watching right now, I am going to explain what you are to expect when booking for the Conjuring House under the current owner, Jacqueline Nunez. There has been some recent controversy surrounding Jacqueline on how she has treated some of her now ex-caretakers at the Conjuring House. So I'm going to share some of my thoughts on this recent controversy, but then I'll get back on topic on why you actually clicked on this video in the first place. Because when I explain some of the details on what it's like actually being at the Conjuring House and booking with the Conjuring House, it may really surprise you. So, Jacqueline Nunez last week sent out a Facebook post which honestly just sounded like the rambling scrambled thoughts of a nutter. Reading between the lines, she accused Cody Satori, everyone's favourite toe-tapping couple, of faking their ghost communicating methods.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock!
She then goes on a tirade of abuse and just keeps swearing over and over again in a way that makes her come across as an angry, unhinged person. Honestly, Jacqueline, if continuing your ownership of the Conjuring House is having this kind of effect on you, just sell it. I'm sure it's worth a pretty penny and you have no shortage of buyers. Shortly after Jacqueline made this Facebook post, Jason Hawes hosted a live stream where he had a bunch of the ex-caretakers of the Conjuring House on the live stream, as well as Cody and Satori themselves, who of course were also Conjuring House caretakers. They were all giving their side on the stories and explaining that Jacqueline Nunez is a toxic boss to work for. I'm not going to get too bogged down with what was said on this live stream, so please go watch the whole thing for yourself. It was a very interesting watch, but I can't help but come away from the whole thing with the mindset that it's pretty rich for Cody and Satori of all people complaining about others being dishonest. I'm not saying it's right for what Jacqueline accused them of, but when you make the decision to lie for a living, it's hard to garner any kind of sympathy, at least from me. As I said earlier, there were other ex-employees of Jacqueline's on Jason's live stream, and it's really good to see Jason giving those people a platform to voice their grievances on how they were treated by Jacqueline while working at the Conjuring House. But for Cody and Satori to moan about any of this just feels like bullshitters bullshitting about another bullshitter. It's like some great big bullshit sandwich. Anyway, let's get back on track with the main subject of this video. When you book for the Conjuring House, you do so on the Conjuring House website. Unsurprisingly, the Conjuring House isn't free, you know, far from it. And some of you may be surprised about just how expensive the Conjuring House has become while under the ownership of Jacqueline Nunez. At the time of booking for our group to go to the Conjuring House, I was screen sharing with Joe Fatale from Entity 7 Paranormal, so I read all of the same terms and conditions that he did. Joe made the down payment for our stay at the Conjuring House, and his channel is under 15,000 subscribers, so that made it all a little bit cheaper. We also decided to make ourselves available for a Monday night investigation, which also made our stay a bit cheaper. But even with saving a bit of money here and a bit of money there, after taxes, this cost Joe around $1,500 for the night, because he also had to pay for an extra person who unfortunately had to cancel last minute. But still, $1,500. For context, the Bel Air house was just under $500, and that was also to stay for the whole night. But there's more. After this booking, we must have missed in some very small print, because really this should have been made far more obvious to us at the time of booking, that for this $1,500, that only permits one channel to film for the purpose of uploading to YouTube.
There can be only one.
But there were 3 channels in our group, including myself. After emailing the Conjuring House to clarify some of this confusion, they told us that on any given night, there was a maximum of only 2 channels that were allowed to film for the intention of uploading to YouTube. But this second channel had to pay another additional fee. And this additional fee was $850.
Oh, come on!
So this brought the total price of our group to stay for one night at the Conjuring House at $2,350 US.
Now I have no money?
Here are some Rhode Island Airbnbs that are cheaper for the price that we paid at the Conjuring House. And these Airbnbs can host a group as big as our group was. Since Entity 7 Paranormal and Weeping Willow Paranormal, please go to their channels to subscribe, they're great by the way, are paranormal investigating channels, I thought it'd be best that they film content for their channels. Since I'm a debunker, I can react to their videos, of which I will get round to doing, so please subscribe to my channel if you want to see that. So this is why I said at the beginning of this video that I have no videos of our investigation on the Side Eye Guy channel, because I was not allowed to film for the purpose of uploading to my channel. But just to be clear here, even if I wanted to pay a shit ton of money to film during our investigation, I was not allowed to. This is a 2-channel per night limit. And this is also why I had to film my solo Conjuring House basement livestream on Entity 7 Paranormal's channel. I do not know of any other haunted locations with a rule like this. You can go to Waverly Hills with a huge group, and as long as you pay the price to film for commercial purposes, as many channels can film on that night in that location as you want. So, before I even get to the Conjuring House, I'm not off to the best start with it. But then, there is even more red tape, which we did not realise at the time of making the actual booking. Before you are allowed to upload your video to YouTube, you must first provide that video to the Conjuring House team, and then they will tell you if it is approved to go on YouTube. And since you are signing a contract giving them permission to do this, God knows what kind of legal troubles you could get into. So I suppose there is a chance that you could pay around $1,500 for your evening to film at the Conjuring House, and then if the Conjuring House say so, your video will never see the light of day on YouTube. There might well be some other haunted locations that also do this same thing, but as far as I can tell, it's really not very common at all. And this is why it's taken me this long to get this video out on YouTube, because I wanted to wait first for Weeping Willow Paranormal and Entity 7 Paranormal to have their videos first approved by the Conjuring House. Because, you know, I'm a debunker, and I might not necessarily say the nicest things about my time at the house. And just on the off chance that the Conjuring House might have been vindictive, I didn't want to give them any reasons to deny my friends' videos. But to be fair, I have no idea if the Conjuring House would even care about my silly little video. I just didn't want to take the risk. So, let's skip to the last thing we had to do before even setting foot inside the Conjuring House. Sign the waiver. Which might sound like a boring standard kind of thing to do, but when you actually read this waiver, it's insane. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but let's just focus on the important bits. It starts off with warnings of weak, uneven, and even broken floorboards, which is all pretty standard when you see the age of this house. But of course we get into stuff like violent spiritual attacks, attachments, and even objects, spirits, or other people falling on or striking you. Yeah, okay, whatever that means. But at number 25, we get the very real danger of wild animals. But of course, the Conjuring House even has to take this too far. And all wildlife known or unknown, including Bigfoot and extraterrestrials.
What's going on, man?
I mean, for the love of God. I have never heard anyone ever claim that Bigfoot is even in Rhode Island, let alone around the Conjuring House. And we're even talking about aliens now. Jacqueline Nunez and the Conjuring House team are just trying their absolute best to shoehorn in as much dumb paranormal bullshit into this waiver as they possibly can. And honestly, I felt embarrassed signing my name onto that waiver. Anyway, now we finally get into the bloody house. And before I go any further, I'd like to introduce historian J'aime Rubio into this video, as she knows a lot of things about the real history of the Conjuring House. Okay, so now we're at the section of the video where I bring in J'aime Rubio, a historian who knows so much information about the Conjuring House, and it's really fascinating hearing from her. J'aime, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
J'aime, I'll be upfront here. One of the things I never really understood about the Conjuring House, you know, in all the research I did before I actually went there, and then the question was no further answered for me after I left, who or what is even supposed to be haunting the Conjuring House?
Well, according to the Conjuring House website. Just up until recently, they were claiming Abigail Cook Arnold's ghost is haunting the house, and some wandering spirit named Matthew K, who allegedly died in 1888, and his spirit did not see the light. So he decided to wander to their house and stay there. Now, if you go on their website, they've changed all that, and now they say it's Abigail and her husband John Arnold that are haunting the house. So they've changed, they've swapped out ghosts.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, I don't really understand who or what is supposed to be haunted, because one minute it's demonic, the next it's like a malevolent spirit. You know, if it's any of the Arnolds, I don't understand why there would be anything sinister happening there. But it always seems to be some sort of sinister presence in the house, and I can't help but think that is purely there to get people scared and excited and to bring people in, to add an element of danger. Where would this sinister energy be coming from?
We're usually used to dealing with things like spirits or ghosts. This was something else. It was, we think we were dealing with demons again.
I honestly don't know. I mean, the former owner said that the house wasn't haunted and she lived there for 30 years. So from the people I've talked to who have either lived there or stayed there many times over the years, nobody had anything happen to them that they would consider some sort of an evil paranormal experience.
One of the big claims I also hear, Jamie, is that the land is haunted. I hear this a lot. And one of the big things I hear is that there was supposed to be a battle site. I believe it's called the King Philip's War. Is that correct?
Right. And that was in the 1600s. And from my knowledge, it did not take place on that land right there. It took place elsewhere. And the only Revolutionary War battle that ever took place in that area was in Newport, which was 60 miles east of there. So there's no battle that ever took place on that land.
The more you look into it, the less likely it is that there's like any reason. It started with Bathsheba. That's now been dispelled. Then they went on to, oh, it's the land. I've also heard people say things about Native American burial sites, which is always the fail-safe for all these haunted house locations, that it's always a Native American burial site.
Right.
And then we go to the King Philip's War, which you've just disproven, and I just can't see what is supposed to be haunting that place, and especially what kind of evil or negative energy is supposed to be haunting that place. Like, even by the law of the house itself, it's completely inconsistent.
Right. And on top of that, there has never been a murder, there has never been a suicide, and there's never been a drowning on that property. I've done the research. I've gone all the way back to the beginning when the first structures were built there. There is nothing sinister that has ever taken place on that land.
While we were at the Conjuring House, our tour guide and the caretaker was a guy by the name of Brian.
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
I got to admit, I was hoping for Cody Satori, but Brian was still a lovely guy all the same.
Now go away.
We have no footage of Brian because it's stipulated that we are not allowed to film the caretakers while they give their tour. When you stay at the Conjuring House, there is a caretaker that stays with you overnight. You don't actually see him for most of your time at the Conjuring House, but he needs to be there in case something goes wrong or you just need assistance with anything. This is not uncommon for overnight experiences at haunted locations. During our tour, Brian outright denied the Bathsheba Sherman myth. And speaking of this myth, let's hear from Jamie about it. Can you please tell us about the truth behind Bathsheba Sherman?
Well, the story that was in the film was completely fabricated. The stories in Andrea Perron's book were actually fabricated as well. The truth of the matter is that Bathsheba Sherman was an innocent victim who was slandered in the 1970s, and no time sooner than that. They blamed her to be the entity haunting the house on Round Top Road in Burrillville, Rhode Island, the entity that allegedly terrorized the Perron family. But in reality, she was just a normal lady. She was a Baptist. She died at the age of 73 years old at home in her bed from a stroke of paralysis. She did not hang herself at the property as the film portrays her to be. She was never accused of being a witch. She was never accused of any wrongdoings. She never murdered anyone, and there were no deaths at her hand at any point in time. And she had no association to the house on Round Top Road. So all of that has been completely fabricated.
And was one of her children or any of her children ever pierced at the back of the head with a sewing needle?
No, that was made up. And my assumption is that the Warrens made that story up. Believe it or not, there's even a book in the archives over there called the Black Book of Burrillville. And somebody chronicled all of the odd deaths, suspicious suicides, things like that. And Bathsheba's not in it, and her kids aren't in it. So, their deaths were just normal, natural causes or, illness, nothing nefarious.
So, Jamie, can you explain to us where this story first originated about Bathsheba being this witch and killing her own children? Where did this start?
It started in Burrillville in August of 1973, and it is believed to have started with Carolyn Perrin.
So Carolyn must have just done some research into the history, and for some reason she just plucked Bathsheba's name out of the history books.
Well, my theory is because the parents had a dog named Bathsheba when they were living elsewhere before they even moved to Burrillville. So that name was a familiar name with the family. The dog had been hit by a car and died, so it wasn't there with them anymore. Carolyn talked to a lady named Donna Eisenstadt, who was part of the Parapsychology Investigatory and Research Organization, also known as PYRO. She sought PYRO out to talk about how she believed there was an entity in the house. This is when the name Bathsheba came up. Donna believed that Carolyn came up with that when she was at the cemetery walking around.
Oh, okay. And speaking of the cemetery, of course, Bathsheba's grave to this day is desecrated.
Yes, it's been vandalized so many times. The stones had a lot of damage over the years, and when it finally was vandalized for the last time, it was irreparable. So Betty at the Historical Society had to take it into permanent storage.
Brian pretty much said all of the same points Jamie just explained. I asked Brian if he and the other caretakers who work at the Conjuring House make sure that all the guests that come through hear this same debunk of the Bathsheba Sherman myth. Brian explained to me that he does this, but he could not speak for all the other caretakers, which is fair. But it does make me wonder, if the other caretakers do say the Bathsheba Sherman thing is BS, then why are there still so many paranormal investigating YouTube teams who spin this well-known debunked narrative?
I am Bathsheba. Okay.
And Lorraine Warren said that this house is haunted by a malevolent spirit, and they think that it was Bathsheba Sherman, who at the time was considered a witch.
Over 100 years ago, a woman named Bathsheba Sherman had once lived on this land. Rumor has it that one day she was babysitting a neighboring child when that child was eventually found dead from a needle wound in the back of its head. Now immediately she was accused to have done it because she was the last one to have seen the child, but nothing was ever proven. But this is where it gets weirder. Not long after that, her husband would apparently witness her taking their own child's life before immediately pledging her allegiance to the devil and cursing all who would live on her land.
Bullshit.
Also, while on this tour, Brian told us that he would rather we did not wander around the grounds during the night, which was pretty disappointing since I kept hearing the grounds of the Conjuring House is as haunted as the house itself, if not more haunted. And the reasons why he asked us not to wander around the grounds at night, the neighbours might complain about the noise. The grounds of the Conjuring House is pretty big, I couldn't even see the next house over. So, for $2,350, we were asked to not leave the house. Meanwhile, when a huge channel like Project Fear filmed at the Conjuring House, they were allowed to wander out and about filming all sorts of nonsense for hours on end with Cody and Satori. So yeah, this definitely left a bitter taste in my mouth. Now I'm not blaming Brian for this, I'm sure he was told from his boss. Last point on Brian, I asked him, because I just had to, if he had witnessed Cody and Satori's toe tapping method. Brian said he had, and he outright believed it was legit. He told me that you really have to see it for yourself, and then when you do see it in person, you will not believe it's fake. Now I have to admit, I have obviously not seen this done in person, but even still, I just cannot believe that that is legit. I just can't. Oh. Lastly, Jamie, I've just got to ask you, since that house is so old and so many different families would have lived there, how many of these different owners of the house claimed there was any kind of hauntings?
There's only 2 families that have ever claimed the house was haunted, and both of them stand to make money. Number 1, the parents. Number 2, the Heinzens. They're the only families that have ever really said that the house is haunted. They could try to say Norma said it, but it's a long story. Norma had the ghost hunters in, I want to say, the early 2000s, but she just thought it would be funny to have them out there. She didn't think anything would come out of it. She's a skeptic. She doesn't believe in any of that. Pam Kenyon, her dad was raised there his whole life. Her grandma and grandpa lived there. All of her ancestors lived there for over 200 years. She stayed over there a lot growing up. She said the house is not haunted. So really, the only people that have ever said it was haunted are the parents and the Heinzens.
Well, Jamie, thank you very much for taking the time to explain some of this and clearing up the real history of the Conjuring House. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for having me on.
Next up, I want to talk about the structure of the house itself. As you saw earlier in that waiver, that it stated and warned that the floorboards in this house are not great. Pretty much every step you take in every single room in this house, bar the basement, creaks. We were there on a cold, windy winter night, and when the wind really picks up, the whole house creaks. But I have seen very few ghost hunting channels who go to the Conjuring House actually bring this point up. They all seem to ignore that this is a very old house, and it does just make noise. And I think that's a very important detail to admit. Many of these channels freak out over knocks and creaks they heard while asking questions to the ghosts, but honestly, the house just naturally has noises all the time because it's so old. Also, it's worth noting that there is a pretty busy road right next to the house, which makes a lot of noise that can be heard inside the Conjuring House. Again, I never hear this getting brought up. There are a couple of other little annoying things that just triggered me while we were at the Conjuring House. Like, one of the rules is you're not allowed to use Ouija boards while at the Conjuring House. However, there are 2 Ouija boards on the fireplace, a Ouija board pillow, and even a Ouija board blanket on the sofa. Furthermore, Cody and Satori call themselves the human Ouija boards, and yet they were allowed to do their bullshit methods inside the house without any issues.
Just for anyone new who may be watching, they hold hands and stuff starts happening, knocking, movement. They're almost like the human Ouija board, is what you say.
I guess so, yeah.
But whatever. I also don't understand why there's a replica of the Annabelle doll in its little hutch inside the Conjuring House. I know the Warrens are involved in the Conjuring House as well as Annabelle, but Annabelle has absolutely nothing to do with the Conjuring House. So as far as I'm concerned, this just looks silly being here. The last thing that I want to talk about is this section of the building. The Conjuring House is small. There are more rooms that you would expect in this small property, but some of these rooms are tiny. This part of the building, which has an attic too, is one of the bigger rooms of the Conjuring House. However, under the Conjuring House's new management, you are only allowed access in this room at the very beginning and the very end of your stay at the Conjuring House, because this is now the gift shop. That's right, everyone. The big, bad, scary Conjuring House has a gift shop. And relative to the size of this house, this is actually a pretty big gift shop. The gift shop is quite possibly the biggest room in the whole bloody house. Because, you know, of course it is. So if you were to book overnight for a stay at the Conjuring House investigating, this whole section of the house is locked up and you have no access to it. And I know for a fact that this is a change since Jacqueline Nunes took control of the Conjuring House. Corey and Jen, who used to own the Conjuring House before Jacqueline, had this room fully accessible for anyone to investigate. So when Corey and Jen had ownership of the Conjuring House, this seemed to be the main entrance into the building. But now, this is the main entrance into the building from the car park area. I would say having this much of the building shut off is probably about 25 to 30% of the overall Conjuring House being non-accessible. So yeah, that $1,500 is looking even less value for money now. You're encouraged to not go outside, and even 25% of the house you can't gain entry into. This building was small enough before all of these stipulations, but now you've got a whole night in just really a handful of rooms to stay in. And believe me, it can get pretty boring pretty quickly. This also annoyed me because I wanted to go into the attic of that extension, because this is where where some Sam and Colby fans believed that they saw a ghost head from the window on the outside of the building, and I wanted to go into that attic to see if there was a fan or a light mounted on the ceiling.
And then on the left here is slow-mo and zoomed up for you guys all to see together. Literally looks like it's peeking out. I'm gonna pause it right here. Boom. Okay. Right there, we obviously don't have enough information to tell 100%, but almost identical.
With all due respect, what the fuck are you talking about?
All in all, I would struggle to recommend anyone goes to the Conjuring House, unless you're a massive channel and then Jacqueline will roll out the red carpet for you. You will most likely feel cheated and taken advantage of while you are at the Conjuring House under the current management. Am I saying the Conjuring House is definitely not haunted? Not necessarily. A lot of people have been there and had experiences. And for me personally, I'll explain if anything happened to me or not when I do my reaction video while I was at the Conjuring House. But after speaking to Jamie about the history of the Conjuring House, it does start becoming a little bit difficult to believe the place is actually haunted, I gotta admit. If you have been to the Conjuring House either under its current ownership or previous owners, please let me know your experiences and thoughts in the comments. So, with all that being said, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Cheerio!